What the hunter-gatherers can teach us about AI. Introduction. Before the first story. Long before cities rose from the earth, before metal was shaped, before the first seeds of agriculture were pressed into soil, humanity lived in a world so quiet and so ancient that it's almost impossible for us to imagine. A world where the night sky wasn't polluted by anything except stars, where every footstep had meaning, and where the boundary between survival and failure was measured in moments rather than years. It was a world of small groups, wide landscapes, and deep attention. A world held together by the rhythms of light, weather, hunger, seasons, and the knowledge passed from one generation to the next around a single flickering fire. We often talk about the hunter-gatherers as if they're distant shadows, figures at the very edge of recorded history, primitive in their tools and simple in their understanding. But the more we learn about them, the clearer it becomes that they were not a lesser version of us. They were us, living in a different configuration. Their cognition, their social dynamics, their storytelling, their relationships with nature and each other, these weren't the early chapters of humanity, they were the blueprint. And in a strange, almost paradoxical way, that blueprint is becoming relevant again. We're entering an age where artificial intelligence, something our ancestors could never have imagined, is reshaping our world just as profoundly as fire once did. AI is dissolving complexity, accelerating knowledge, fracturing narratives, and reorganizing the way we work, think, communicate, and understand ourselves. And yet, beneath all that, it's pulling us back towards some of the oldest patterns in human history. Smaller groups, slower rhythms, a shrinking world, a growing unknown, a reliance on forces that are larger than ourselves. This deep dive is about that parallel. It's about what hunter-gatherer life can teach us, not about survival or archaeology, but about ourselves, our psychology, our vulnerabilities, our strengths, and the ways in which AI may return us unexpectedly to modes of living that shaped our species for hundreds of thousands of years. Across the next hour, we'll explore fire as the first intelligence, tools as extensions of mind, tribes as the foundation of meaning, stories as frameworks for reality, and the edge of knowledge as a place where humility begins. We'll look at how Homo sapiens once coexisted with other human species and what that encounter might reveal about our coexistence with AI. And finally, we'll reflect on why the future we're heading into may look less like a technological singularity and more like a reconfigured prehistory. A world supported by AI but guided by the same ancient instincts that have always shaped who we are. This isn't nostalgia, it's orientation. Because to understand where we're going, we have to understand the conditions that made us who we are. And if we get that right, we may discover that the age of AI doesn't erase our humanity at all. It simply changes the terrain on which we express it. So let's begin in the only place that makes sense, before cities, before history, before the first seed touched soil. Let's begin at the fire. Chapter 1. Fire. If you could sit beside a hunter-gatherer fire for a single night, the first thing you'd notice is how everything, from the mood to the movement of the group, seemed to orbit around that single point of light. The fire wasn't simply there to warm bodies or cook meat. It formed the centre of their world, a small circle of safety carved out from an environment that, for most of human history, was dangerously indifferent to our survival. In that glow, you would see faces illuminated in soft amber, hear stories drift between generations, and watch the slow, deliberate tending of flames that could not be allowed to die. Fire was both tool and companion, both protector and threat. and in the quiet hours of night it represented something deeper. The first technology humans learned not just to use, but to live alongside. Fire changed us in ways that are easy to overlook now that its power has been folded into electricity, heating systems, and cooking appliances. For early humans, fire extended the day, giving time for planning, reflection, and conversation. It softened food, reshaping our physiology and freeing up calories that fueled the expansion of our brains. It signaled safety when predators prowled at the edge of darkness. And perhaps most importantly, it brought people together in a kind of enforced closeness that shaped how we think, bond, and communicate even today. Around the fire, knowledge wasn't stored in books or databases. It was passed from voice to voice, shaped by memory and woven into stories that were retold until they became part of the group's shared identity. That closeness, that collective attention, is something that feels distant now. We live in a world where our fires are individual screens, glowing rectangles that draw us inward rather than outward, fragmenting attention across millions of pieces of content rather than anchoring us to a single shared focus. But AI's arrival, paradoxically, may pull us back into something closer to the hunter-gatherer experience. When a tool becomes powerful enough to sit at the center of life, to store our memories, answer our questions, help us work and shape how we understand the world, it becomes a modern fire, something we gather around for comfort, guidance, and meaning. The difference is that our ancestors always recognized that fire could burn just as easily as it could warm, and they treated it with an instinctive respect that we seem to have lost in our age of convenience. Fire also taught early humans the subtle art of dependency, long before the concept existed in language. Once a group learned to carry embers wrapped in leaves or bark, they became bound to that resource. It allowed them to travel, settle, and survive harsh winters, but it also meant that losing the fire brought them crashing back into vulnerability. This wasn't superstition. It was a practical understanding that certain forces, once adopted, become central to survival. We are beginning to experience the same with AI. The more we rely on it to remember details we forget, solve problems we struggle with, or simplify tasks that once demanded effort, the more central it becomes to our lives. And while this offers tremendous benefits, it also requires awareness. Because any technology that quietly infiltrates the core of how we think has the potential to reshape us, sometimes in ways we don't fully notice until the change is complete. The hunter-gatherer relationship with fire was built on a mixture of fear and reverence. They never imagined they could control it. They believed they borrowed it, a force older than them, more powerful than them, and entirely indifferent to their intentions. This mindset is worth reclaiming. Too often we treat modern technology as if it exists purely for our convenience, as if it must be safe simply because we can summon it at will. But fire was a reminder that powerful tools demand humility, and that a careless relationship with something capable of reshaping your world is a fast route to harm. AI sits in that same category. It offers extraordinary potential, from creativity to prediction to knowledge synthesis. But if we allow it to replace our attention, our curiosity, our judgment, we risk letting the embers of our own cognition die out without noticing. And perhaps the deepest parallel of all lies in the way fire transformed not just what humans did, but who we became. Many anthropologists argue that fire played a fundamental role in the development of human intelligence, not merely by enabling better nutrition, but by creating the conditions for reflection. Fire gave us evenings, long stretches of low-light time where the day's tasks were done and the mind could drift, imagine, or rethink. It created the psychological space in which stories could be shaped and reshaped, becoming the foundations of culture, belief, and identity. In other words, fire didn't just support human thinking, it expanded the boundaries of what thinking could be. AI has the potential to do something similar. It won't change our biology, but it will change our cognitive environment. It can give us leverage over problems that would otherwise be insurmountable, free up time for pursuits we consider meaningful, and illuminate corners of knowledge that were previously inaccessible. But the direction of that change depends on how we choose to relate to it. If we approach AI with the same mixture of curiosity, respect, and caution that our ancestors brought to the fire, it may elevate us. If we treat it carelessly, as a convenience rather than a force to understand, we may find ourselves shaped by it in ways that are far less desirable. Fire was the first intelligence we encountered, a non-living phenomenon that extended our abilities, demanded our attention, and subtly rewired how we lived. AI is the second, and just as the first fire marked the beginning of human culture, the second may mark the beginning of a new chapter in what it means to be human. The challenge, just as it was thousands of years ago, is not to let the flames go out in our hands, not to believe that we're immune to its dangers, but to learn how to live alongside it with the same blend of respect and responsibility that once kept our ancestors alive beneath the vast, indifferent sky. Chapter 2. The Hunt. If you could follow a hunter-gatherer group out onto the plains at first light, what would strike you immediately is the quiet sense of purpose that underpinned everything they did. The hunt wasn't simply a task to complete or a strategy for acquiring food. It was a shared undertaking that bound the group together through risk, effort, and anticipation. Every person played a part, whether they were tracking, flushing game from cover, preparing tools, or waiting with the patience that only necessity can cultivate. And while modern life is filled with goals and deadlines, very few of them carry the existential weight that a hunt carried. Success meant survival, failure meant hunger. That thin line between the two forged a level of cooperation that most of us will never experience. The hunt forced early humans to develop an intuitive understanding of each other's strengths and weaknesses. One person might read animal tracks with accuracy, another might excel in stamina, another might have the calmness required to deliver a precise throw. In a small tribe, these differences weren't sources of competition, they were assets that fit together like pieces of a puzzle, forming a collective intelligence greater than any individual could muster alone. Human cognition evolved inside that collaborative structure. We learned to anticipate one another, to communicate without words when silence mattered, and to trust that the group's survival rested on everyone doing their part. That trust wasn't sentimental or idealistic, it was functional. It was survival distilled into cooperation. This shared purpose is one of the things that modern society struggles to replicate. We live in a world where individualism is not only encouraged but required for economic and social mobility. We're trained from childhood to focus on personal achievement rather than collective contribution. Yet, ironically, our species evolved in the opposite direction. The hunt was a reminder that we're at our most capable when we pool our attention, our skills, and our instincts. There is a reason that team cohesion feels so powerful, whether in sport, rescue work, or creative collaboration. It's an echo of the environment in which our minds were shaped. And this is where the parallels with AI become really interesting, because AI in its most beneficial form has the potential to restore the kind of collective intelligence that hunter-gatherers relied upon, not through shared danger or physical proximity, but through cognitive augmentation. When a person uses AI effectively, they are no longer thinking alone. They're drawing on a broader system of capabilities, memory, pattern recognition, reasoning, and knowledge retrieval that extend far beyond the limits of a single brain. In many ways, AI resembles the cooperative structure of the hunt. The user contributes context, intention, and judgment, while the system contributes speed, optimization, and the weight of accumulated information. Together, they form something larger, more capable, and more adaptive. But just as the hunt required trust and coordination, our relationship with AI will require its own forms of discipline. A hunter who panicked at the wrong moment or ignored the signals of the group could jeopardize the entire attempt. In the same way a careless or over-reliant use of AI can undermine our own skills, weaken our ability to think critically, and distort the group-level narrative we rely on to make sense of the world. The hunt was a balance between individual judgment and collective strategy. Our use of AI will need to follow the same pattern, a partnership in which each side contributes what it's good at without expecting the other to shoulder every responsibility. Another aspect of the hunt worth reflecting on is the role of uncertainty. Hunter-gatherers never stepped into the landscape with a guarantee of success. They moved through a world that was unpredictable, shifting, and full of variables beyond their control. That uncertainty shaped their cognition in subtle but important ways. It forced them to pay attention to patterns in weather, animal behavior, and terrain. It taught them patience. It reinforced the importance of resilience because every hunt that failed was a lesson as much as a setback. Modern life, by contrast, has insulated us from uncertainty to a degree that would have been unthinkable to our ancestors. Our environments are predictable, our routines are consistent, and the consequences of error are rarely life-threatening. AI risks amplifying that insulation even further. When answers are always available, when information is always accessible, and when complex tasks can be delegated to an external system, we may slip into a cognitive passivity that erodes the resilience our ancestors had in abundance. The hunt teaches us that not knowing is a vital part of being human. It sharpens perception. It cultivates humility. It reminds us that the world does not bend to our will simply because we desire an outcome. If AI removes all uncertainty from our daily lives, we risk losing the psychological muscles that were forged in the struggle for survival. Yet there's a deeper parallel to explore here, one that sits beneath the practical aspects of hunting. The hunt provided meaning. It gave people a clear sense of why they existed and what their role was. Feeding the tribe wasn't just a task, it was a purpose that anchored identity. Modern humans search endlessly for meaning in their work, relationships, and hobbies, yet many feel unmoored from any clear sense of purpose. AI has the potential to dissolve even more of that remaining structure that gives life meaning, especially if it removes our remaining opportunities to contribute something essential. This doesn't mean we should resist AI, but it does suggest that if AI eventually shoulders most of the tasks we associate with competence and productivity, we will need to be deliberate in cultivating new forms of meaning, ones rooted not in what we produce but in how we connect, learn, create, and think. Hunter-gatherers didn't measure their worth by output. They measured it by contribution, by presence, by the willingness to step into danger for the good of the group. In a future where AI performs the bulk of functional labour, we may find ourselves needing to rediscover that older form of meaning, one tied to relationships and curiosity rather than efficiency. The hunt then is not simply an ancient behaviour, it's a blueprint for how humans function at their best, in cooperation, with humility, under uncertainty, and with a shared sense of purpose that's larger than the individual. AI cannot replicate those conditions on its own, but it can either weaken or strengthen them depending on how we integrate it into our lives. If we treat AI as a replacement for effort, we risk severing ourselves from the very forces that shaped our minds. But if we treat it as a partner, a tool that extends our abilities while still requiring our judgment, it may enhance the qualities that made our ancestors successful in the first place. The hunt reminds us that being human was never a solitary experience. It was always collaborative, always communal, always tied to something larger than our personal desires. As we step deeper into the age of intelligent machines, that lesson may become more important than ever. The question is not whether AI will change us, but whether we can preserve the parts of ourselves that make life meaningful, the curiosity, the cooperation, the resilience, and the quiet sense of purpose that emerge when people work together under a single rising sun. Chapter 3. The Tool. If you place a stone tool from the Paleolithic period in your hand, The first thing you notice isn't its age or even its simplicity, but the precision hidden inside that simplicity. A sharpened flint may look crude to us, but every edge, every facet, and every angle was shaped through repeated strikes that demanded patience, accuracy, and a deep familiarity with the material. Hunter-gatherers didn't have shelves of tools for different tasks. They had a handful of implements that could split, scrape, cut, and shape, and their survival depended on mastering those few objects to an extraordinary degree. A single tool could follow a person for years, even decades, gradually wearing a small imprint into the hand that held it. In that imprint sat a record of effort, of hunts survived, shelters built, and journeys completed. The scarcity of tools shaped the psychology of early humans in a way that's almost the inverse of how modern life shapes us. When you only have 2 or 3 reliable implements, you develop an intimate relationship with them. You learn their limits. You understand what each notch and edge can do. You sense when the stone is about to fracture or when a blade has reached the end of its useful life. There is a kind of embodied intelligence that grows from this repetition, the sort that lives in muscle memory rather than explicit knowledge. The tool becomes an extension of the hand, and in time, an extension of the mind. Today we live in a world built from thousands of tools, apps, interfaces, devices, and software systems, each designed to solve a specific problem or remove a small piece of friction from our lives. We switch between them constantly. Messaging apps, editing software, browsers, maps, media players, productivity platforms, and countless others that demand micro-adjustments to our attention. It's difficult to imagine a greater contrast with the cognitive conditions in which our minds evolved. Instead of mastering a single tool, we perform a constant juggling act across dozens, never learning any of them deeply, never resting long enough with one to form anything resembling intuition. And that's where the first meaningful parallel to AI emerges, because while our current world burdens us with an endless array of digital tools, AI may be the force that dissolves that complexity. For the first time since the Stone Age, we're stepping towards a world where one tool, a single adaptable system of intelligence, may become the primary interface through which we achieve most things. Whether we write, plan, create, design, search, or manage our lives, the medium is beginning to condense. Instead of learning how 20 different tools work, we may only need to understand how to communicate clearly with one. In this sense, AI could return us to a more ancient pattern: mastery through familiarity, simplicity through focus, and skill through repeated interaction with a single cognitive partner. This simplification carries enormous promise. It suggests a world where the barriers between intention and outcome are dramatically reduced, where we can pour our time into the ideas themselves rather than the mechanics of bringing them into existence. But this shift also echoes the deeper truth embedded in the hunter-gatherer relationship with tools. Mastery only arises when you meet the tool halfway. A stone blade doesn't cut for you. It demands your attention, your technique, your presence. AI, even at its most advanced, will require a similar level of engagement, not physical skill but cognitive discipline, the ability to ask precise questions, provide clear context, understand the limits of the system, and recognize when to rely on it and when to think for ourselves. Hunter-gatherers also understood that the outcomes of tools were not neutral. A poorly shaped blade was dangerous, not just ineffective. It could slip, shatter, or injure the user. This awareness bred caution, not fear, a pragmatic respect for the limits of technology. In our own time, we risk losing that instinct. The convenience of digital tools often blinds us to their weaknesses, and the seamless design of modern interfaces makes them feel harmless, even when they exert profound influence over our perceptions, habits, and choices. AI will only magnify this dynamic. It will be capable of guiding us, assisting us, and extending our capabilities. But if we relinquish too much, it may also shape our thinking in subtle ways that bypass our awareness entirely. Another useful comparison sits in the way hunter-gatherers repaired their tools. When a blade dulled, they didn't discard it, they reshaped it. And when a handle cracked, they reinforced it. When a point broke, they sharpened another edge. Their tools evolved with them, slowly changing as the user's skill deepened and their needs shifted. This idea of coevolution, of humans and tools shaping one another, is central to understanding how AI will influence the future. AI systems adapt to us through data, interaction and feedback. They learn our preferences, predict our intentions and anticipate our needs. But at the same time, we adapt to the system. We alter how we search, how we plan, how we solve problems, and even how we think. This mutual shaping is already happening, and it will intensify as AI becomes more embedded in daily life. There is also something important to reflect on in the hunter-gatherer mindset around sufficiency. Their aim wasn't to accumulate tools, it was to master the few they had. Our world operates on the opposite principle, abundance over depth. The belief that more options equal more power, yet the truth is often the reverse. The noise of constant choice can overwhelm us, dilute our focus and fragment our attention. AI may offer a strange return to that ancient logic, a reduction of complexity that allows us to invest deeply in a single technological relationship. But the danger is that if we rely too heavily on this single tool, we risk losing our breadth of skills that once defined human adaptability. So the tool sits at the intersection of ability and identity. For early humans, it shaped not just what they could do, but who they became. The same will be true for us. AI will influence how we think, how we create, how we solve problems, and how we define competence. The question is not whether this influence will occur, but whether we can maintain a healthy relationship with a tool that is vastly more capable and vastly more opaque than anything our ancestors could have imagined. In the end, the hunter-gatherer approach to tools offers a quiet but necessary form of guidance. Master the tool, but don't be mastered by it. Respect its power, but understand its limits. Shape it thoughtfully and allow it to shape you only where it strengthens rather than weakens your ability to act. And above all, remember that simplicity has value. In a world filled with noise, one well-understood tool can be worth more than 1,000 poorly grasped ones. The future may demand that we reclaim that ancient wisdom, and not by returning to the past, but by carrying its lessons forward in a world shaped by intelligence that sits both inside and outside ourselves. Chapter 4. The Story. If you could sit among a hunter-gatherer group at night, listening as their stories drifted across the fire, you would quickly realize that these weren't just tales for entertainment. They were memory systems, shared portable databases encoded in narrative form. Without writing, without archives, without any structural way to preserve information beyond the human mind, stories became the backbone of cultural survival. They taught children how to track animals, warned adults about dangerous terrain, explained the origins of illness, and offered guidance on how to behave within the group. Every story carried a fragment of knowledge, and each retelling ensured that essential information wasn't lost to time. Crucially, these stories weren't neutral. They weren't merely factual explanations of the world, but mixtures of observation, belief, imagination, and fear. A river spirit might warn of dangerous currents. A tricky animal might symbolize the risks of overconfidence. A creation myth might unify the group under a shared understanding of their place in the world. These layers of meaning were imprecise, but they were effective. They allowed people to navigate a world that was far too complex to understand in purely rational terms, especially when they lacked the scientific tools we now take for granted. Myth became a kind of emotional knowledge, not accurate in the literal sense, but deeply useful in shaping behaviour. Our relationship with knowledge is very different now, yet oddly similar in its vulnerabilities. We live in an age where information is infinite, where facts are endlessly accessible, and where almost any question can be answered within seconds through a combination of search engines and AI systems. But this abundance doesn't necessarily make us wiser. It overwhelms us. It exhausts us. It gives us access to explanations we don't have the cognitive bandwidth to evaluate, placing us in a strange position where we possess unprecedented access to knowledge, but are often paralyzed by the sheer scale of it. Hunter-gatherers understood that knowledge needed structure to be useful. It needed rhythm, repetition, and emotional resonance. Stories gave them that structure. Today we face the opposite challenge: too much knowledge, not enough narrative cohesion. AI intensifies this. It delivers answers instantly, but those answers lack the emotional scaffolding that helps humans integrate information into their identity and worldview. It can tell us the what and the how, and even the why, but it can't tell us where that knowledge fits into the tapestry of meaning that guides behaviour. In that sense, AI delivers insight without narrative, and without narrative, insight becomes weightless. Yet the comparison goes deeper, because hunter-gatherer stories also served as a kind of social glue. They created unity. When everyone shares the same stories, they share the same mental models. Disagreements may exist, but the underlying worldview remains coherent. Today, our narratives are fragmented beyond anything our ancestors could have imagined. We inhabit thousands of micro-realities, each shaped by algorithms, media bubbles, and personalized content streams. Technology has replaced the single fire around which a group once gathered with millions of digital fires, each casting its own glow and shadows. The result is a society that struggles to agree not just on values, but on basic facts. AI has the potential to either repair or exacerbate this fragmentation. On the one hand, it could help us synthesize knowledge, identify common ground, and navigate complexity with more clarity than ever before. On the other hand, AI systems may personalize information so deeply that each of us receives our own tailored narrative about the world, a digital myth-making process that mirrors almost perfectly the oral traditions of the past, but on a vastly larger scale. In that scenario, meaning becomes hyper-personalized, and society risks splintering into cognitive tribes built not around geography or kinship, but around algorithmically generated stories that feel true because they resonate emotionally. Another aspect worth considering is that hunter-gatherer stories carried psychological protection. They softened the terror of a world that was unpredictable and often lethal. Myths explained thunder, illness, famine, and misfortune in ways that reduced anxiety, offering frameworks that made the incomprehensible feel manageable. In an odd way, our use of AI echoes this desire. When we ask AI to summarize news, solve problems, or make predictions, we're outsourcing uncertainty to a system that can package overwhelming information into digestible chunks. This can seem empowering, but it can also make us dependent on narratives that remove ambiguity, even when ambiguity is a crucial part of understanding reality. There is also a cautionary thread woven through these ancient stories. Oral traditions were incredibly powerful, but they were also vulnerable to distortion. A small change in emphasis, a forgotten detail, or a personal bias could shift the meaning of a story across generations. Hunter-gatherer societies didn't have mechanisms to correct false beliefs or flawed narratives. This could lead to harmful customs, misunderstood dangers, or collective errors that persisted long after their usefulness had faded. Today, we face a similar danger. AI may generate explanations that sound perfectly coherent but are subtly incorrect, incomplete, or skewed by training data. Without the ability to evaluate these narratives critically, we risk building our worldview on foundations that feel solid but are quietly unstable. Yet in spite of these dangers, the hunter-gatherer approach to story offers something profound that we can carry into the age of AI. They understood that knowledge wasn't only functional, it was communal, emotional, and deeply intertwined with identity. They recognized that information needed to resonate to be remembered, and that a story shared around a fire could shape behaviour more effectively than a set of instructions. As AI becomes more central to how we process the world, we'll need to find ways of weaving its insights into narratives that preserve meaning rather than erode it. In the end, stories are how humans make sense of existence. They're how we can turn random events into patterns, how we can give ourselves a place in the universe, and how we can understand what matters and why. AI can help us gather information, but it cannot yet tell us who we are, what we value, or how we should live. Those questions require narrative, the kind that arises from lived experience, connection, and reflection. The hunter-gatherer world reminds us that meaning is not a byproduct of knowledge. It's a deliberate construction shaped over time, shared across a group, and anchored in a story that helps people navigate the chaos of life. As we move deeper into the age of intelligent machines, we may find ourselves needing to craft new narratives that draw on AI's vast capabilities without losing the human instinct for meaning-making. The fire may have changed, and the world around us may be unrecognizable to our ancestors, but the need for stories endures. They remain the bridge between information and understanding, between the external world and the inner self, a bridge we must maintain if we want the future to feel coherent, purposeful, and human. Chapter 5. The Rhythm. If you lived among a hunter-gatherer group, even just for a short time, the most striking thing wouldn't be the tools they used or the dangers they faced, but the rhythm that shaped every aspect of their existence. Life unfolded according to cycles far older than human civilization: the rising and setting of the sun, the slow drift of seasons, the migrations of animals, the fruiting of plants, and the swelling or shrinking of rivers. Time wasn't something to schedule or optimize. It was something to move with. Days were structured not by clocks or calendars, but by the body's needs and the land's offerings. And in that quiet, ancient cadence, life found a form of coherence that modern society, with all its sophistication, struggles to replicate. To a hunter-gatherer, the world was not divided into the natural and the artificial. There was only the environment and the group's relationship to it. Shelter, food, warmth, tools, and meaning all emerged from the same interconnected system. The forest wasn't a resource, it was a home. The river wasn't scenery, it was sustenance. The sky wasn't a metaphor, it was a guide. This intimacy with the land created a feedback loop that shaped behaviour, belief, and thought. When the environment thrives, so do you. When it falters, you falter with it. There was no insulation from nature's rhythms, no technological buffer that dulled its power, and no illusion that humans stood apart from the forces that governed their existence. Contrast this with the modern world, where technology has severed our connection to natural cycles so thoroughly that many people move through life without noticing the seasons shift or the sun's position in the sky. Artificial light, heating, cooling, and digital timekeeping have flattened the rhythms that once governed us, replacing them with a tempo driven by productivity, convenience, and constant stimulation. AI is poised to accelerate this further, smoothing out the friction of daily life and detaching us even more from the physical anchors that shaped human behaviour for hundreds of thousands of years. But conversely, AI might also push us back towards something resembling the hunter-gatherer mindset, because as the complexity of modern life increases, and as tasks pile up, and as the pressure to keep up intensifies, AI becomes a kind of cognitive shelter, a leveling force that simplifies decision-making, reduces overwhelm, and returns us to a more manageable rhythm. If AI handles the constant noise of admin, navigation, planning, and information overload, we might find ourselves gravitating towards a slower, more intentional pace of life, one that echoes the natural balance our ancestors experienced, not through necessity, but through choice. Hunter-gatherers didn't have work and leisure in the modern sense. Their tasks were integrated with life. Foraging could be communal and social. Hunting could be purposeful and absorbing. Tool-making could be meditative. Rest was taken when the body demanded it, not when a clock permitted it. This is worlds away from our culture of segmented time, deadlines, and performance metrics. Yet, the rise of AI raises an intriguing possibility. If machines take on the bulk of repetitive or cognitively draining labour, humans may once again experience life as a continuous flow rather than rigid schedule. The rhythm might return, not because we revert to primitive living, but because the pressures that distort our natural pace begin to dissipate. There is something else the hunter-gatherer rhythm reveals, and it relates to our capacity for presence. When your survival depends on reading the land, listening for distant movements, noticing subtle changes in weather, or tracking the habits of animals, attention becomes a finely honed skill. You cannot drift through the day in a haze of distraction. You must remain connected to the world in front of you because the world in front of you is constantly speaking through the crunch of leaves, the call of birds, the timing of rainfall, and the growth of plants. Modern humans, by contrast, live with attention that is increasingly fractured. We experience life through screens, notifications, and micro-interruptions that break continuity and erode depth. AI, unless used thoughtfully, may amplify this fragmentation by giving us more reasons to outsource attention. And yet, paradoxically, AI could also restore presence if used with intention. By managing the chaotic flood of digital inputs that overwhelm us, it can free up the cognitive space required for deeper engagement with the physical world. The question is not whether AI will reshape our rhythm, because it will, but whether that rhythm will be one of unbroken distraction or deliberate calm. The hunter-gatherer model reminds us that a slower, steadier tempo is not a luxury or a lifestyle choice. It's a condition under which the human mind evolved to function optimally. There is also a deeper philosophical parallel that we should consider. Hunter-gatherers lived with an implicit acceptance of limitation. Food could not be conjured at will. Weather could not be controlled. Illness could not be prevented. Life's rhythms were not negotiable, and that acceptance shaped their psychology in ways we might struggle to appreciate. Modern life is different because it operates on the belief that everything can be optimized, managed, or personalized. AI embodies this belief to its fullest extent. It offers solutions, predictions, shortcuts, and enhancements in a way that gives the impression that life can be tamed into perfect efficiency. But the ancient rhythm teaches us that limitation is not the enemy. In fact, it's the framework within which meaning emerges. It forces creativity, it builds resilience, it grounds us in reality rather than fantasy. If AI eliminates all friction and all unpredictability, we risk losing the very qualities that make us human. A world without resistance may feel comfortable, but it may also feel strangely hollow. In the end, the hunter-gatherer rhythm offers a lesson that is both simple and profound. We're not built for constant acceleration. We're not wired for relentless novelty or perpetual cognitive strain. Our minds are tuned to patterns that unfold slowly, repeatedly, and with a kind of quiet inevitability. As AI becomes more embedded in our lives, we may need to consciously reintroduce rhythm into our days. Not because we're returning to primitive living, but because the wisdom of that older world still applies. Life moves best when it moves in cycles, not in a straight, unbroken line. And if the future brings a world where AI lifts much of the burden of labour, where our life becomes freer and our tasks more optional, we might rediscover something humanity has not felt in millennia: the gentle cadence of a life lived in step with something larger than ourselves. Chapter 6: The Tribe. If you observe a small hunter-gatherer group over any stretch of time, what becomes immediately clear is that the tribe wasn't merely a social unit, it was the entire world. A typical band might consist of 20 to 40 individuals, each known intimately by the others, each woven into a web of shared memory, obligation, and affection. There were no strangers in such a group, no loose acquaintances, no vast networks of half-known faces. Every person mattered because every person was visible. Your value in the tribe wasn't an abstraction, it was felt directly through shared labour, shared stories, shared risks, and shared joys. The emotional gravity of such a group created a kind of psychological stability that modern humans rarely experience. Hunter-gatherers lived with a depth of familiarity that's almost impossible for us to fathom. You knew the sound of each person's footsteps. You recognized their cough, their laugh, their silhouette in low light. You could predict their habits because you'd watched them since birth. Conflict still happened, of course, but it happened inside a structure of closeness that allowed grievances to be resolved through conversation, ritual, or simply time. The tribe functioned like a small ecosystem of personalities, a balance of temperaments, skills, and roles that held the group together through necessity. Survival depended on this cohesion, and in a world without formal institutions, laws, or hierarchies, trust wasn't optional, it was the cornerstone of life. In this sense, the tribe offered something that modern life has largely eroded, a felt sense of belonging. Today, many people live in densely populated environments but move through them as if they are completely alone. Cities place millions of bodies in physical proximity, yet emotional isolation has become one of the defining challenges of the modern era. Technology promised connection, but instead delivered an illusion of it, a thin layer of interaction spread across hundreds of relationships that never deepen into anything substantial. AI risks intensifying this dynamic unless we confront the underlying causes of our isolation. Because while AI can facilitate communication, it cannot manufacture genuine belonging. Belonging requires presence, vulnerability, and shared experience, qualities that emerge slowly and cannot be compressed into digital form. Yet the parallels between AI and tribal life run deeper than a simple contrast. In some ways, AI may push us back towards smaller group dynamics, even as the population grows. As information becomes increasingly personalized, filtered, summarized, and tailored by AI systems, people may find themselves gravitating towards micro-communities that reflect their values, interests, and emotional preferences. This could recreate in digital form the small-scale tribal structures that shaped early human psychology. But the difference is profound. Hunter-gatherer tribes were bound together by shared survival, shared responsibilities, and shared physical environments. Modern micro-tribes are bound by algorithms, content streams, and curated narratives. The cohesion is shallow compared to the deep bonds that once held small groups together. And this raises an important question. What happens when belonging becomes optional? For hunter-gatherers, the tribe wasn't something you joined or left. It was the context of your whole existence. Today we can slip in and out of communities with ease, abandoning them the moment they no longer suit our preferences. AI will make this even easier by smoothing social interactions and offering low-effort forms of connection that feel comforting but lack the substance that genuine relationships require. The risk is that we drift into a world where connection becomes frictionless but fragile, abundant in quantity but impoverished in depth. There is another point worth exploring: the tribe-distributed cognitive load. Knowledge was shared across the group. One person might know which plants were safe to eat, another might understand seasonal patterns, another might be skilled at tracking or mapping the landscape. No individual held all the knowledge required for survival. Instead, the tribe functioned as a collective mind, with each person contributing their expertise to the group's overall intelligence. AI mirrors this structure in a strange and powerful way. It allows us to access knowledge we do not personally possess, expanding our cognitive range in the same way a tribe expanded the abilities of its members. But while AI provides access to knowledge, it does not provide the relational glue that gives that knowledge meaning. In a tribe, knowledge was always embedded in human relationships, learned through storytelling, demonstration, apprenticeship, and shared experience. With AI, knowledge arrives without the context that once anchored it. It's clean, precise, and decontextualized. This can make us powerful, but it can also make us untethered. When knowledge floats freely from community, it becomes harder to integrate into a coherent worldview. Perhaps the most meaningful lesson the tribe offers us is the importance of interdependence. Hunter-gatherers survived not because individuals were exceptionally strong, but because the group was exceptionally cohesive. They understood instinctively that no one thrives alone. Modern culture, with its emphasis on self-sufficiency and personal achievement, often obscures this truth. AI compounds the illusion by enabling individuals to do more without help, to work independently, learn independently, and solve problems independently. It risks weakening the very bonds that once anchored human life. Yet the paradox is that AI could also, if used thoughtfully, free us from the pressures that erode connection, giving us more time, energy, and emotional bandwidth to invest in relationships that really matter. In the end, the tribe represents a model of living that's both ancient and urgently relevant. It reminds us that humans are not built for isolation, nor for superficial connection spread across hundreds of weak ties. We're built for depth, for shared experience, for collaboration rooted in trust and familiarity. AI will change the landscape of human connection, but it cannot replace the fundamental need for belonging. The challenge will be to use this new technology in ways that strengthen our relationships rather than replace them, to ensure the future does not scatter us into digital tribes that mimic the structure of belonging without offering any of its substance. If we can hold on to the lessons of the tribe, the importance of presence, trust, cooperation, and shared meaning, we might find ways to navigate the age of intelligent machines without losing the social foundations that make life bearable. And if we can't, we may discover that technological progress, however spectacular, cannot compensate for the loss of the small, familiar world that once held us together. Chapter 7. The Edge of Knowledge. If you were to step into the mental world of a hunter-gatherer, the first thing you'd notice is how small it was. Not in richness and not in texture, but in scope. Their world consisted of the land they could traverse on foot, the animals they hunted, the plants they gathered, and the weather patterns they recognized. Beyond that lay a vast and fathomless unknown. Mountains in the distance might as well have been on other planets. A neighbouring group 100 miles away might never have been encountered in a lifetime. The sea, for those who lived near it, wasn't a boundary, it was a myth-making force, infinite, alive, and largely incomprehensible. This limited scope didn't make hunter-gatherers ignorant, quite the opposite. They were acute observers of the world around them, reading signs in the environment with a sensitivity that modern humans have all but lost. But their knowledge was bounded. It grew outward slowly, shaped by direct experience rather than abstract information. What lay beyond the horizon was often filled with stories, spirits, ancestors, dangers, or opportunities, but it remained a mystery. And crucially, there was no pressure to know more than what was necessary for survival. The edges of nowhere were accepted, not feared. Contrast this with the modern condition, where knowledge is effectively endless and the pressure to keep up with it is relentless. We live with a constant awareness of how much we don't know. There is always more information, more news, more breakthroughs, more tragedies, more opinions, and more noise. This abundance creates a psychological tension unknown to our ancestors, a sense that we're perpetually behind, that understanding the world is an impossible task, and that clarity is always slipping through our fingers. AI intensifies this dynamic. It gives us access to answers instantly, but it also amplifies the feeling that there's no limit to what we could know if only we had the time. It turns the world into something both tiny and enormous. Tiny because we can summon any piece of information with a sentence, but enormous because the sheer volume of information is infinite, unbounded, and ungraspable. Hunter-gatherers lived at the centre of a small, knowable circle. We live at the centre of an ever-expanding sphere that grows faster than our cognition can process. There is something strangely peaceful about the hunter-gatherer relationship to the unknown. They didn't try to understand everything. They didn't need a theory for every phenomenon. They didn't feel pressure to synthesize global events or reconcile conflicting worldviews. The world simply was. Mystery wasn't a flaw in their understanding, it was part of life's fabric. Their attention was directed towards the immediate, the track in the mud, the fruiting tree, the sound of a bird, or the shift in wind that signalled a storm. This narrow but deep focus fostered calm, presence, and a strong sense of relationship with the land. We, by contrast, live with a kind of ambient cognitive overload. The unknown is no longer distant but pressing, intruding into our lives through constant streams of information. AI can summarize these streams, filter them, and present them to us in digestible form, but it cannot remove the underlying pressure of living in a world where everything is knowable and nothing can be fully grasped. This creates a paradox that will shape the psychological future of our species. The more AI expands our access to knowledge, the more we may need to reclaim the ancient comfort of not knowing. Another dimension worth exploring is the way hunter-gatherers built their worldview. Knowledge wasn't accumulated through reading or studying. It was lived, observed, and woven into stories that formed a coherent narrative. This narrative didn't require absolute truth. It required functional truth, truth that helped people survive, coordinate, and make sense of their place in the world. Today we're inundated with competing narratives, many of which are shaped by algorithms and amplified by digital communities. AI will accelerate this fragmentation further by tailoring information to individuals, creating personalized realities that make it hard to establish shared understanding. Hunter-gatherers lived in cognitive coherence. Modern humans increasingly live in cognitive dissonance. And yet there's a powerful parallel between the ancient and the modern that's often overlooked. Hunter-gatherers understood the world through a narrow lens, but they understood it deeply. We understand the world through a wide lens, but often superficially. AI offers an opportunity to bridge this gap, giving us breadth without the cost of depth, but only if we learn to use it as a tool for focus rather than distraction. If AI becomes something that helps us slow down, synthesize and integrate information into meaningful patterns, it may guide us back towards the psychological stability our ancestors once enjoyed. But if it becomes another source of infinite novelty, it risks pushing us even further from the conditions under which human cognition evolved. Finally, the hunter-gatherer perspective on the unknown reveals something essential about human nature. Mystery isn't just an absence of knowledge. It's a space for imagination, curiosity, and humility. The unknown invites storytelling, shared exploration, and communal interpretation. When AI reduces mystery by providing constant answers, we may lose the sense of wonder that once animated human life. But that isn't inevitable. If we choose to let AI handle the noise while preserving the deeper mysteries, the ones that matter less for survival and more for meaning, we may rediscover a balance between knowledge and awe that modernity has disrupted but never extinguished. In the end, the edge of knowledge for hunter-gatherers wasn't a boundary to overcome. It was a reminder of their place in a vast, unknowable universe. As AI pushes us towards a reality where the unknown shrinks and the knowable expands, we may need to intentionally recreate those boundaries, not to limit our progress, but to preserve the psychological conditions that make life feel grounded, meaningful, and human. Chapter 8. The Mirror. If you trace our species back to the moment when Homo sapiens shared the world with Neanderthals, you'll find a story that's been simplified, mythologized, and misunderstood in equal measure. For a long time, the popular narrative was that Homo sapiens were inherently superior, more clever, more adaptable, more inventive, and that Neanderthals were slow, brutish, and doomed to extinction. But modern research paints a very different picture. Neanderthals were intelligent, resourceful, and physically robust. They created tools, buried their dead, cared for their injured, controlled fire, and may even have produced symbolic art. They were not an evolutionary dead end. They were another branch of humanity. What distinguished Homo sapiens wasn't raw cognitive ability, but something more subtle, a capacity for flexible cooperation, symbolic thought, and rapid cultural innovation. In other words, Homo sapiens didn't outthink Neanderthals, they out-networked them. Their advantage lay not in individual brilliance, but in the ability to share knowledge across larger groups, adapt faster, and create more intricate forms of culture. This was not a battle of intellect, it was a difference in how intelligence scaled socially. And this is where the first, almost uncanny parallel to AI begins to emerge. AI does not need to think like us to surpass us in certain domains. It doesn't need a human-like consciousness, inner life, or emotional landscape. It simply needs to process information faster, integrate knowledge more efficiently, and coordinate across systems in ways that biological neural networks cannot match. Its advantage, like ours once was, is scale. Just as Homo sapiens represented a new kind of cognitive ecosystem, AI represents one too, a system capable of evolving far more rapidly than biological intelligence ever could. But the relationship between Homo sapiens and Neanderthals wasn't purely adversarial. Evidence suggests the two species interbred, shared environments, and may have exchanged knowledge. This coexistence, part competition, part cooperation, mirrors the dynamic we're beginning to enter with artificial intelligence. We're not being replaced by AI, but we are entering an era where we coexist with a form of intelligence that's both familiar and alien, helpful and disruptive, complementary and, in some areas, clearly superior. Neanderthals were extraordinary at survival within stable environments. They were strong, capable, and deeply adapted to the landscapes they inhabited. Homo sapiens, by contrast, thrived in change. They produced more varied tools, more complex social structures, and more flexible strategies for dealing with new challenges. AI echoes this second lineage. It's built for rapid adaptation, endless iteration, and flexibility that no biological species can ever match. This doesn't make it a threat in the predatory sense, but it does make it a mirror, one that reflects our strengths and weaknesses with uncomfortable clarity. One of the most profound lessons from the Sapiens-Neanderthal relationship is that intelligence is not a single metric. It's a tapestry of abilities shaped by context. Neanderthals were stronger, they endured harsher climates, they had superior eyesight, they were in many ways more physically resilient. Homo sapiens succeeded because of a particular configuration of abilities that allowed knowledge to spread, behavior to adapt, and ideas to evolve. When we compare ourselves to AI, we often make the mistake of assuming superiority must be general, but superiority is always contextual. AI is already surpassing us in memory, pattern recognition, language modeling, and problem solving. We remain superior in areas that rely on lived experience, embodied cognition, moral intuition, and emotional complexity. But the gap will continue to shift, just as it did between sapiens and Neanderthals. Another parallel worth reflecting on is existential. To Neanderthals, the arrival of Homo sapiens must have been bewildering, a kind of living paradox. A species that looked like them, moved like them, hunted like them, and perhaps even sounded like them, yet possessed abilities that seemed strangely calibrated for a changing world. Their coexistence was not just a biological overlap, but a meeting of two different trajectories of intelligence. Today, AI represents a similar divergence. It looks like human intelligence on the surface. It speaks in our language, solves our problems, imitates our styles, but beneath that familiarity lies a fundamentally different substrate. Artificial rather than biological, scalable rather than embodied, instantaneous rather than experiential. In this sense, AI is our mirror. It reflects what we value, what we misunderstand, and what we underestimate about our own minds. It forces us to confront the fact that our intelligence is not absolute, but contingent, a product of evolution rather than destiny. Just as the rise of Homo sapiens reshaped the world that Neanderthals inhabited, the rise of AI is reshaping the world we inhabit. And the choices we make now will determine whether that reshaping resembles cooperation, displacement, or something entirely new. There is also a subtler parallel. Neanderthals lived in small, tightly connected groups. Their social structures were cohesive but limited in scale. Homo sapiens formed larger networks, shared ideas across tribes, and built cultural systems that grew more complex over time. AI, like Sapiens, thrives on scale. It learns from billions of words, millions of interactions, and global patterns of behavior. When we interface with AI, we're connecting not just with a tool, but with a vast collection of data, a kind of super tribe of human knowledge, aggregated into a single point of access. This destabilizes our sense of individuality, just as Sapiens may have disrupted the identity of smaller Neanderthal groups. And yet, despite everything, the Neanderthal legacy lives within us. Their DNA is woven into our genome. Their strength, resilience, and adaptations remain part of who we are. This complicates the simplistic narrative of replacement. It suggests that coexistence leaves traces. Even when one lineage becomes dominant, the other shapes it from the inside. Our coexistence with AI may follow a similar trajectory. AI will not replace us, it will interweave with us, cognitively, socially, and culturally, changing how we think and how we live, but also preserving aspects of humanity that remain irreplaceable. In the end, the story of Sapiens and Neanderthals is not a warning of extinction. It's a reminder that intelligence evolves through encounters with difference, that cooperation and competition often coexist, that the emergence of a new kind of mind does not mark the end of the old, but the beginning of a more complex landscape. As AI grows alongside us, we will need to navigate this new landscape with the same flexibility that once allowed our ancestors to thrive. Not by outperforming the new intelligence, but by understanding where our strengths lie, where collaboration is possible, and how coexistence can become a source of resilience rather than fear. Chapter 9. The Future Past. If you imagine the distant future, it's tempting to picture a world saturated with complexity, hyper-automation, sprawling digital ecosystems, ceaseless streams of information, and an ever-expanding web of technologies that demand our attention. Yet there is an argument, subtle but increasingly persuasive, that AI may lead us somewhere very different. Not forward into a labyrinth of complexity, but backward into a simpler mode of living that mirrors, in unexpected ways, the conditions under which our species first emerged. It wouldn't be a literal return to hunter-gatherer life, of course, but a psychological, structural, and perhaps even philosophical return, a future that resembles a form of techno-prehistory. Hunter-gatherers lived without the world of long-term planning, bureaucracy, or formal labour. Their needs were immediate and grounded: food, water, shelter, warmth, and the maintenance of social bonds. Their days were punctuated by physical tasks that were cognitively engaging, but rarely overwhelming. Their minds weren't clogged with schedules, notifications, and to-do lists that sprawled endlessly into the future. And perhaps most strikingly, they didn't live in a world where meaning was tangled up with productivity. Life was something to be experienced, not managed. AI has the potential to unravel many of the structures that now dominate our lives. If it becomes capable of handling administration, scheduling, analysis, research, financial planning, transportation, logistics, and the 1,000 other micro-tasks that saturate modern life, then much of what we call work could dissolve into the background. Human contribution may shift away from task-oriented labour and towards something softer: creativity, reflection, personal development, community, exploration, and interpersonal connection. In other words, the very things that occupied human life before civilization layered it with abstraction. Of course, this depends on how society adapts. But if AI reaches a level where it can meaningfully absorb the cognitive burdens of everyday living, we may find ourselves living with a rhythm more aligned with our evolutionary instincts. Days that are quieter, minds that are less fragmented, a reduction in the mental load that modern life places on us, not because the world becomes simpler, but because the complexity is handled on our behalf by a system capable of navigating it effortlessly. There is something deeply ironic in this possibility. Humans have spent millennia inventing structures to manage the increasing complexity of civilization, from agriculture to bureaucracy to industrialization and digital infrastructure. And yet the pinnacle of this complexity may lead us back to a kind of simplicity that we haven't experienced since prehistory. Not a collapse, but an offloading, a reorientation, a transition from doing to being. The simplicity of the future would not be primitive, it would be curated, supported, and underpinned by a technological intelligence operating invisibly in the background. In this context, the parallels between ancient hunter-gatherer life and a future shaped by AI become surprisingly clear. Hunter-gatherers relied on the environment to provide their needs: water from rivers, food from the land, shelter from the landscape. In a future of AI-driven abundance, humans might rely on digital systems to provide the equivalents: information, organization, opportunity, and guidance, all delivered with minimal friction. The environment becomes cognitive rather than physical, a landscape of intelligence that supports life in the way that forests and plains once did. This raises profound questions about dependency. Hunter-gatherers were dependent on the land in a way that modern humans often romanticize but don't fully understand. Their survival hinged on reading the world correctly, understanding seasonal cycles, animal behaviors, weather patterns, and plant ecologies. Our future dependency will not be on rivers and forests, but on algorithms and networks. The challenge will be ensuring that this dependency, rather than weakening us, creates the same sense of rhythm, coherence, and structure that the natural world once provided. Another striking parallel lies in the shrinking of the world. For hunter-gatherers, the world was both small and vast. Small because their physical range was limited, vast because so much beyond that range was unknowable. AI may create a similar duality. The world may shrink to the scale of our immediate environment, our home, our neighborhood, our chosen community, because much of what lies beyond can be navigated digitally. Yet simultaneously, the world may feel larger than ever, filled with infinite virtual spaces, knowledge systems, simulations, and digital frontiers. The combination of local simplicity and global abstraction may create a psychological landscape that echoes prehistory more than modernity. There is also the question of meaning. Hunter-gatherers found meaning in direct experience: the hunt, the story, the landscape, and the tribe. In a world where AI handles the practicalities of living, humans may rediscover the importance of meaning rooted in relationships, creativity, and exploration. Without the pressure of constant labour, people may return to a more intrinsic engagement with life, the kind that emerges from curiosity, not obligation. Technology might create the first civilization in which meaning is not tied to productivity or economic necessity, but to personal fulfillment and shared experience. But this future also carries risks. Hunter-gatherer life worked because it took place within small, cohesive groups that shared responsibility and kept each other grounded. AI could either support this cohesion or erode it. If personalized AI systems become the center of individual life, people may drift into isolated cognitive ecosystems. Micro-tribes not built for shared survival, but from tailored narratives, customized knowledge, and algorithmic alignment. In this scenario, the simplicity AI creates could fracture society rather than unify it. Finally, the most interesting parallel may lie in the way Homo sapiens once coexisted with older human species. Just as we once lived alongside Neanderthals, cooperating, competing, and exchanging knowledge, we may soon coexist with AI in a similar dance. Neither replacement nor domination, but a strange form of partnership that reshapes us in ways we cannot fully foresee. If our ancestors' world transitioned into ours through adaptation, integration, and cultural evolution, then our world may transition into the age of AI through the same process. In the end, the idea of a techno-prehistoric future is not fantasy, it's a plausible trajectory that emerges from the logic of intelligence itself. As AI absorbs the burdens of complexity, the pace of human life may slow, not accelerate. Our world may feel smaller, safer, and more cohesive. Our attention may shift from survival tasks back to the timeless human pursuits of creativity, connection, and contemplation. The future may not be an endless escalation of technological intensity, but a return in a new form to the simplicity that once defined our species. Chapter 10. The New Human. When you pull the threads of hunter-gatherer life together, the fire, the hunt, the tool, the tribe, the rhythm, the stories, the edge of knowledge, what emerges is not a picture of a primitive species stumbling through prehistory, but a portrait of humanity at its most coherent. A species living in alignment with its environment, embedded in small groups that offered belonging and purpose, and equipped with a mindset shaped by rhythms, limitations, and mysteries that gave life texture. It's easy to romanticize this world, but the aim here is not nostalgia, it's clarity. Because if we understand the conditions under which the human mind evolved, we gain insight into the conditions under which it may thrive in the future, even as AI reshapes the landscape around us. The arrival of artificial intelligence is often framed as a rupture, a break in the continuity of human history. But the deeper truth is that AI may return us to something more ancient, not in material terms, but in psychological ones. It holds the potential to lift the burdens of complexity that modern life has layered onto our species, freeing us to rediscover aspects of ourselves that industrialization, urbanization, and the digital acceleration have buried. This doesn't mean abandoning technology. It means using it as a partner in restoring the balance our minds implicitly crave. But this future is not guaranteed. AI is a mirror, and what it reflects back to us will depend entirely on how we choose to integrate it. If we treat it as a replacement for effort, curiosity, and human connection, we risk hollowing out the very qualities that make us human. If we offload every cognitive task to it, we may drift into passivity, losing the resilience, creativity, and attentiveness that kept our ancestors alive in environments far harsher than our own. And if we allow AI to shape our narratives too deeply, we may find ourselves living in personalized cognitive bubbles that resemble tribes in form but lack the substance of genuine belonging. Yet the opposite is equally possible. AI could strengthen our ability to connect, learn, and create. It could reduce the noise that overwhelms us and amplify the instincts that guided our species for hundreds of thousands of years. It could help us to reclaim our presence, our focus, and our sense of rhythm. It could free us from repetitive labor and allow us to invest more in relationships, creative endeavors, and the deeper forms of meaning that hunter-gatherer life centered around. In this scenario, AI doesn't erode our humanity, it magnifies it. The lessons of prehistory point us toward a future that is neither utopian nor dystopian, but conditional. The new human will not be defined by what AI does, but by how humans adapt to its presence. From fire we learn respect. Our ancestors understood that powerful forces demand emotional discipline, not fear or worship. AI deserves the same mixture of awe and caution. From the hunt we learn cooperation. Human intelligence scales when we work together with each other and with the tools that extend us. From the tool we learn mastery. Simplicity, focus and understanding deepen capability more than endless choice ever will. From the tribe we learn belonging. No amount of technological sophistication can replace the need for deep, familiar relationships. From rhythm we learn balance. Life collapses under constant acceleration. It flourishes when time flows with meaning rather than urgency. From stories we learn coherence. Information becomes bearable only when it sits inside a narrative that helps us interpret our place in the world. From the edge of knowledge we learn humility. Mystery is not the enemy of progress, it's the soil in which curiosity grows. And from Neanderthals we learn coexistence. The emergence of a new intelligence does not require the disappearance of the old. It requires adaptation, understanding, and openness. These lessons point to a future in which the new human is not a diminished figure overshadowed by artificial intelligence, but a more grounded, reflective, culturally stable version of the current one. A human who uses AI not to escape their evolutionary constraints, but to live more fully within them. If AI becomes our cognitive environment, the landscape we move through rather than the tool we pick up, then the skills that matter most may be the most ancient of all. The ability to pay attention, to form meaningful relationships, to work cooperatively, to navigate uncertainty, and to create stories that give life shape. These are not relics of a bygone era. They're the foundations of psychological well-being, and they're resilient precisely because they were forged in the crucible of prehistory. The future won't look like the past, but the past may offer the blueprint for a healthier future. The new human will not be one who abandons the wisdom of our ancestors, nor the one who clings to it sentimentally. It will be the human who understands that technological progress does not erase our nature, it magnifies it. And if we can learn to use AI without severing ourselves from the roots that once anchored us, then the age of intelligent machines may not mark the end of the human story, but the beginning of a new chapter, one in which we live with more intention, more connection, and more clarity than we've achieved in centuries. Thank you for listening to What the Hunter-Gatherers Can Teach Us About AI. Why not explore the Layered Future YouTube channel and website for more writing and video guides on the future of the human experience in the face of technology? New videos come out every week on YouTube, and new articles come out every week on the website as well. I look forward to seeing you in the next video.